Welcome, history enthusiasts and story lovers, to the Blade of History, your journey into one of the most turbulent, tragic, and thrilling periods in Chinese history. In our last episode, we witnessed the first glimmer of hope for the coalition against Dong Zhuo. Sun Jian, the Tiger of Jiangdong, with his disciplined and fierce army, handed the tyrant's forces their first significant defeat at the Battle of Yangren. This victory, however, was a solitary one. The rest of the coalition, plagued by indecision and self-interest, remained inert, content to watch from the sidelines. Spooked by Sun Jian's ferocity and realizing the strategic vulnerability of the capital, Dong Zhuo made a fateful decision to abandon Luoyang. But Dong Zhuo was not a man to simply retreat. He would leave nothing for his enemies but ashes and sorrow. Today, we follow the story of one man who refused to stand by, the devastating fate of a glorious city, and the unimaginable suffering of its people. Following the victory at Yangren, Sun Jian's forces occupied the strategic forts in the vicinity of Luoyang. The path to the capital was seemingly open, yet the main camp of the coalition, led by Yuan Shao, remained stagnant. Days turned into weeks, and the leaders indulged in feasting and political maneuvering, their initial zeal to punish the tyrant all but extinguished. One man could not abide this paralysis. Cao Cao, ever the pragmatist and a man of action, was incensed. He saw a golden opportunity slipping through their fingers. He went before the assembled warlords, his words a mixture of frustration and impassioned plea. According to historical texts, Cao Cao addressed them, saying something to the effect of, "We have raised an army of righteousness to destroy the tyrant and bring peace to the land. Now that we have a clear advantage, why do you hesitate? Dong Zhuo is afraid. He has abandoned the imperial palace and is fleeing west. This is the will of heaven, a chance to strike a decisive blow. One battle, and the empire can be settled. We must pursue him." But his words fell on deaf ears. The other warlords, wary of Dong Zhuo's remaining military might, and perhaps secretly pleased to see the central authority crumble, offered excuses. They claimed their troops were weary, that a hasty pursuit was too risky. In reality, their alliance was already beginning to fracture, each lord more concerned with preserving his own strength and eyeing the territories of his supposed allies. Disgusted and resolute, Cao Cao declared that if no one else would act, he would do so alone. With his own loyal troops, a force of several thousand, he set out in pursuit of Dong Zhuo's retreating army in April of 190 AD, believing that he might shame others into following through his bold initiative. Cao Cao's force marched towards Xingyang, a key pass on the road west from Luoyang. What he didn't know was that Dong Zhuo had anticipated such a move. The tyrant had left behind a formidable rear guard under the command of his skilled general, Xu Rong. As Cao Cao's army entered a narrow, treacherous terrain, they walked straight into a meticulously prepared ambush. The Battle of Xingyang was a slaughter. Cao Cao's men, tired from the pursuit and outnumbered, were no match for Xu Rong's fresh and well-positioned troops. The attack was swift and brutal. Cao Cao's army was shattered, and he himself was in mortal danger. In the chaos of the rout, he was thrown from his horse and struck by an arrow. Surrounded and on the verge of being captured or killed, his cousin, Cao Hong, rode to his side. Seeing the gravity of the situation, Cao Hong dismounted and offered his own horse to Cao Cao. When Cao Cao, ever proud, initially refused, Cao Hong uttered a line that would echo through history. "The world can do without me, but it cannot do without you, my lord." He helped the wounded Cao Cao onto his horse and then, on foot, fought a desperate rearguard action, holding off the enemy long enough for Cao Cao to escape the immediate slaughter. The two, battered and bloodied, eventually managed to retreat under the cover of darkness. Cao Cao's first major independent military campaign had ended in a disastrous defeat. It was a harsh lesson in the realities of war and the perfidy of his so-called allies. He returned to the coalition camp not as a triumphant hero, but as a stark reminder of their collective failure. His gamble had failed, and in the meantime, Dong Zhuo was free to enact the next stage of his horrific plan. While Cao Cao was being cut down at Xingyang, Dong Zhuo was overseeing a crime of historical proportions. He was not merely abandoning Luoyang, he was razing it to the ground. His scorched-earth policy was born of pure malice and cold, calculated strategy. If he could not have the capital, no one would. The process began systematically, beginning with widespread looting. Dong Zhuo's soldiers were given free rein. They descended upon the wealthy households of the capital, breaking down doors, seizing valuables, and committing unspeakable acts of violence against the populace. Anyone who resisted was cut down where they stood, but the private wealth of the citizens was not enough to satiate Dong Zhuo's greed. He then turned his attention to a target, both sacred and rich: the tombs of the former emperors of the Eastern Han Dynasty. Under the direction of Dong Zhuo's adopted son, Lu Bu, these magnificent imperial mausoleums were desecrated. They were broken open, their sacred contents plundered for gold, silver, and precious jewels. Centuries of accumulated imperial wealth, meant to accompany the sons of heaven into the afterlife, were carted away to fund Dong Zhuo's war machine. Once the city had been thoroughly ransacked, the final terrible order was given. Torches were put to the magnificent wooden structures that had defined the skyline of one of the world's greatest cities. The imperial palaces, grand ancestral temples, government offices, and sprawling libraries filled with priceless scrolls and historical records were all set ablaze. The fire raged for days, a monstrous inferno that turned the sky black with smoke. The poet Cao Ji, a son of Cao Cao, would later write a heartbreaking poem capturing the devastation, imagining a traveller returning to the ruins. Climbing to the ridge of Beimang Mountain, from afar, I look down on Luoyang. Luoyang, how lonesome and still. Palaces and houses all burnt to ashes, walls and fences all broken and gaping, thorns and brambles rising to the sky. I do not see the old men. I only see the new youths. I turn aside, no straight road to walk. Waste fields no longer ploughed. 1,000 miles without chimney smoke. When the fires finally died down, Luoyang, the glorious capital of the Eastern Han for nearly 2 centuries, was a smouldering ruin. A city of immense cultural and historical significance was reduced to a ghostly wasteland of charred timber and rubble. Dong Zhuo had left nothing behind for the coalition but a hollow, tragic victory. And for the people of Luoyang, the nightmare was only just beginning. The destruction of the city's magnificent structures was a tragedy for the ages. But the human cost of Dong Zhuo's retreat was even more profound, a horror on a scale that is difficult to comprehend. He did not just burn the capital, he uprooted its entire population. On April 9, 190 AD, Dong Zhuo issued the order for the forced relocation of Luoyang's several million inhabitants to the ancient, more defensible capital of Chang'an, hundreds of kilometers to the west. This was not an orderly migration, it was a death march. The historical accounts paint a truly harrowing picture. Dong Zhuo's soldiers, brutal and merciless, drove the people from their homes with whips and swords. Men, women, children, the elderly, the sick, none were spared. They were herded like cattle onto the westward road, given no time to gather provisions. Anyone who was too slow or who dared to protest was killed on the spot. The road to Chang'an became a landscape of suffering. The millions of displaced civilians, stripped of their possessions and without food or water, began to starve. The soldiers showed no pity. The book of the later Han, describes a scene of utter despair. The roads were lined with the dead and dying. The cries of the suffering filled the air. Robbers and bandits preying on the weak added to the chaos and death. The soldiers themselves participated in the brutality, committing countless atrocities against the very people they were supposed to be escorting. Women were violated, and any remaining valuables were torn from the desperate refugees. It is said that the path from Luoyang to Chang'an was littered with corpses, and that the stench of death hung heavy in the air for miles. Of the millions who were forced to leave Luoyang, it is estimated that only a fraction survived the journey. They died of starvation, of disease, of exhaustion, and at the hands of cruel soldiers. They were buried in shallow, unmarked graves along the roadside, a testament to the tyrant's utter disregard for human life. Emperor Xian, the young puppet ruler, along with the nobles and officials of his court, were also part of this grim procession. They too were hostages, forced to witness the immense suffering of their people, powerless to intervene. When this river of humanity finally trickled into Chang'an, they found a city ill-prepared for their arrival. The survivors were left to fend for themselves in a new, unfamiliar place, their homes and lives utterly destroyed. Dong Zhuo had secured his new stronghold, but at a terrible cost. He had turned the heartland of the Han Empire into a wasteland and inflicted a wound on the soul of the nation that would never truly heal. The burning of Luoyang and the forced march to Chang'an were not just acts of war, they were acts of monstrous cruelty that would cement Dong Zhuo's reputation as one of the great villains of Chinese history. Cao Cao's defeat at Xingyang taught him a valuable lesson about the nature of the alliance and the necessity of independent strength. The ashes of Luoyang stood as a monument to the coalition's failure and Dong Zhuo's depravity. And the memory of the millions who perished on the road to Chang'an would fuel the hatred and the desire for vengeance that would drive the conflicts to come. The tyrant was now ensconced in his new capital, seemingly secure. But the seeds of his own destruction were already being sown, not on the battlefield, but within the very walls of his court. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit the like button. It really helps us out. And subscribe for more deep dives into the epic history of ancient China. New episodes every week.